Thank you for everyone for participating in this meeting. In this meeting, we will have 3 presentations, and hopefully all the 3 presenters could join us. The 3 papers are somehow related to, all of them are using CGI models. The first paper is basically concentrating on the implication of total factor productivity, the economy of Colombia, and it takes into account firm heterogeneity and imperfect competition. A nice set of work. The second one is considering the impacts of climate change on the family farming in Brazil and the whole agricultural of the Brazilian economy. The last paper also is taking into account and examining the implication of climate change for the whole economy of Brazil, and in particular for the agricultural activities in Brazil. I think let me check if we have the first presenters. Diego, are you there?
He just arrived, Farzad. I'm going to stop sharing my, Diego, please.
You are muted, Diego.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome. And without further ado, please update your, upload your presentation. Share your presentation. Great, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, very well. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Diego Montañez. This is research work in progress by the Economics and Business Studies Group in FID University, Colombia. These papers participate is Jesus Botero and Álvaro Hurtado. The title, The Productivity of the Agricultural Sectors and its Effects on Economic Growth, as CGE analysis. This research was in progress, and the first step, the incorporate artificial intelligence in the calibration and exogenous variables in the computable generals equilibrium. Okay. This introduced in what the motivation and the context, the global Latin American and Colombia total factor productivity landscape, and present literature review, and called artificial intelligence improve the modeled on computable general equilibrium models, continuation and CGE for productivity analysis in the agriculture sectors, and results and final consideration. And first, I hope you can excuse my very poor English pronunciation. Thank you for your understanding. Entonces, but the begin is productivity is the essence of the medium on long term the economic activity in the country, is the heart and the economic growth is in any economy, and in Syria and standing increase is in the Latin America and Colombia. The productivity highest the diminution in the last layers, and the was causing the problems and activity economic. This event, the world economic has not yet been able to fully recover from the financial crisis, at least in terms of productivity, interrupted periods of outstanding expansion by emerging economies. Research rates for 2% record consecutively in the 2004 and 2007 period. A continuation, the future, the present, the GDP, and in the advancing economies, including United States, Germany, Japan, and England, and France. In emerging economies, GDP included Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Venezuela, and Peru, Mexico, and Argentina. This present the total factor productivity contribution in the GDP, and this show the fall in the financial crisis in 2008, and this posteriorly I have this show as the stand aligned by the productivity and GDP and emerging economies and advancing economies. And this summary is this present economic growth aggregate average to with forecast 3%, and in emerging economies with productive contribution on 0.11% to GDP growth between in this period. Advancing economies had lower of 1.668%, and menus meris is 0.04% respectively. The contribution is the important in this paper as the productivity growth in this period for emerging economies experiencing contraction of minus 0.59% and extension for advancing economies with total factor productivity share of negative. It is important on the paper and on the work. This evolution of productivity, of total factor productivity in Colombia and its economics in the region, Chile, Peru, Mexico, Ecuador, the comparison, the lines versus line by United States, the line gray, versus this show the evolution of productivity in Colombia, and as this for diminution in periods and digamos linear based comparate and first for debate. And finally, contribution of total factor productivity to economic growth in Colombia. And the data set is the conference board, is the expert in productivity level work. This show the contribution, the factors in the GDP, in the digamos, the total factor productivity, the red, el contribution of capital, gray, contribution capital node is ICT and LICT, and labor quantity to GDP growth, the blue, and quantity GDP growth in the yellow. This show the is interesting the amazing contribution negative at the GDP, the total factor productivity. Total factor productivity is the negative in contribution al GDP in the Colombia, especially in this period. It not is recuperate the contribution, the total factor productivity in the profundis and pandemic effects, economics and socials and in the country. In the summary, the similarity manner in Colombia, the economy's house grown be average for 3.3% between in this period, but this growth incorporates of 0.6% reduction in productivity contribution. In this sense, the productivity and reduction and product and GDP in Colombia and the country Latin Americans. For the last 10 years, the picture does not improve, with GDP growth averaging 3.4% more the entry period between, and this is case the growth incorporates 0.2 reduction in productivity GDP. Literatura review productivity is a standard. Digamos, la total factor productivity. This study the focus on investment demands as proxy on TFP as proxy for productivity and semi-parametric estimator with GMIMI econometrics models, semi-parametric estimation techniques, and estimation of the work coefficient. This investigation, the concentration in this literary review productivity, the emphasis, the growth, this productivity in the country, these economic complexes, the Hausman, productivity policy, the rubric, and this popular in this last science, the misallocation of resource, this incorporate in the computal general equilibrium and in dispersion and continuation. And heterogeneidad of the fields, what distribution Pareto in the incorporate and computable general equilibrium model. And World Bank productive project, this is an interesting in this last years in their work productivity in different countries. And summary, the literatura review, this present in the future, and the two focus and with the firms and interaction of enterprise and the firms. And within the firms, the insight to focus efficiency improvements and improvements in value creation or innovation. And the insight the interaction of enterprise. This is interesting, the paper, and misallocation of resource and structural transformation and set of public action or externalities, and this popular. The Eastern State paper misallocation inside a model merits or heterogeneous enterprise. They use it to function the Pareto distribution to firmas the heterogeneity, the productivity. And inside the Literature Review Productivity Colombia, and had study in the multi-factor productivity and multi-factor productivity in these periods. And these studies some consist more in the shocks exogenous in the TFP productivity in the GDP in Colombia more, but no shocks endogenous the productivity. What incorporates this paper with model malits and calibration artificial intelligence. And the conclusion, Colombia has concentration of the small enterprise. And the model CGE, the standards, the new trade theory, and CGE productivity, the new generation CGE. Distinct new feature comparate use the merit and analysis no traditionals, the shock exogenous and shocks endogenous and productivity in Colombia with scenarios for next decade. E simulation of the scenarios that already include the possible economic effects of the pandemic. It is worth adding what.
Diego, you have 5 more minutes.
Okay. Listo. Ready. The last description of JIT model is the summary, the progress, the construction of computer general equilibrium for analysis the agricultural productivity. These 4 states, the recollection information, the data processing, the calibration, the JOT module, fiscal module, external module, and calibration, the 20 types of households divided in 10 rurals, 10 urbans, and the continuation simulation results calibration, benchmarking, the included the effect of the COVID, and CGE modeling counterfactual agricultural productivity ground scenarios in the GANs and those 12 sectors and 16 countries in the sector external. In this science, the results by scenarios that considers COVID as transitory supply shock that triggers demand effects. To this adapt simultaneous the oil shocks on the price quantities of all I5D remittance, increased public spending, among others. GDP growth, the fall in 2020 negative history economic in Colombia, but the next years they recuperate the effect statistics and recuperate the scenario based and the GDP growth and unemployment rate and fiscal deficit. This fall is more in reality, and in this sense. The results agricultural productivity growth scenarios and the model models the two found the result more GDP to in endogenous productivity in the CGE model included model models and calibration and the parameters internationals parameters and industry, the artificial intelligence and calibration and exogenous variables in the model CGE. This show is interesting, and the blue and the line blue is the major in these periods, and a scenario base or benchmarking in the only solid productivity endogenous and and shock. And in this summary, this model is distribution Pareto, and the firma's productivity, the asignación de recursos, it's optimal, and the misallocation and general productivity endogenous, and contribution and total factor productivity, and GDP growth. This document provides more global and relevant vision for the achievability of objective and scenarios analysis, considering current and future challenges and proposed wins were mostly inspired by framework of heterogeneous actors and imperfect stage computation, allowing to the entries of Colombia companies that had not been able to export, while opening cost barriers has endogenous effect on the country's productivity. Since and it is always in the insertion international markets in sector with higher profitability and technology. And finally, the entry Colombian companies that not be able to export. And finally, another point is the CGE model improved significantly with the calibration of parameters and exogenous macro series integrate with machine learning, which suggests that the machine learning technique is called being an important part of the macro forecasting toolkit for emerging countries and an excellent complement to the computable models in the future. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Very nice presentation. So we would like to see questions. Any questions from the audience? Okay. Okay, so Angel, do you want to go with the questions, or should I do that?
Hey, yeah, we can do it either way.
So please introduce the question. So
yeah, Diego, there's one question here from Julio Gustavo. Basically, he missed how you use artificial intelligence in CGE model. What did you do? Which algorithm and which parameter exactly did you forecast using AI?
So that was my question too.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
And the especially parameters is calibrate the international trade, and the machine learning especially on neural networks and the multiple perceptron caps and neural networks in the especially deep learning, and the time series of macroeconomics, the oil price, and the foreign investments direct, and a price at commodities in this effect for the economic Colombia. For this use it to machine learning and this calibrate the time series macroeconomics in the next years, and the results to alignment to results CGE in the next years.
So I would like to understand better what parameters actually you calibrate with intelligence.
The elasticity de substitution and the elasticity de substitution in the Melitz models and elasticity substitution in the offer support extern.
Okay, that's interesting. So, any other question?
But this equation and this no present, but is for the share and in the email or and the link.
Okay, great. So, and I have, if there is no further question, I have additional question for you. Would you please explain how you take into account interaction between total factor productivity and productivity of agriculture? When you go to productivity of agriculture, what do you consider? Is it only productivity of crops or productivity of crops, livestock, and other activities?
See, the agricultural the model is divided in 12 sectors, and the 12 sectors, one specific agricultural sectors, and Melitz models, the shocks and endogenous in the sectors, the only agricultural sectors, and ceteris paribus, the other sectors, digamos, 11 sectors, ceteris paribus. This the shock endogenous, the effective and the agricultural sectors, and the elasticity substitution and shock endogenous in parameters, the distribution Pareto in the agricultural sectors.
So when you discuss about agricultural sector, are you considering productivity of the whole agriculture or productivity of only land?
Activity for land.
Only land. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Good.
Farsa, there's one last question for Diego from Mike Bourne. If I understand correctly, it looked like the historic data showed very small increases or even decreases in total factor productivity, but the projections were much larger, positive 4 or 5%. So is that the case? and if yes, could you explain what made it going from historical small increases to projections being of that magnitude?
Okay, this not considerate this in this comment the word the workshop this paper in construction and this considerate in the your observation not considered in this paper in this moment. Thank you for your question.
Okay, so we may have time for one additional question. So if there is no additional question, I just have the last question. I saw that in your slides, you were talking labor quality. How you measure labor quality? It seems I lost everyone. What's happened?
No, I think Diego turned off the video, but you're still muted, Diego.
I turned the video at the same time. It's a coincidence.
Hello.
Hello,
excuse
yes.
me.
Yeah, so
the question is about labor quality, how you measure that.
Okay. This model, labor quality, this model, no comments, but this model, the labor equality and inequality. This is informality. This inside the inequality, and this model CGE retomate the paper de Jesus Botero on the contribute the labor quality and labor on quality. These characteristics, especially and the ways the way in their frontal station and the function, the production and function, the utility, this equilibrium and are inside or the characteristics in the weight, the page in the weight.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Nice presentation, nice job. With that, I think now we can, it's time to move on to the next presentation. Ask Tariq to please start your presentation, and that is about impacts of climate change on the family farming and agriculture in Brazil. Please go ahead.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to share my presentation.
Thank you, Diego.
Thank you.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, great.
All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Tariq, and I'm going to present this paper entitled The Regional Economic Impacts of Climate Change on Family Farming and Large-Scale Agriculture in Brazil, CG approach. This work is actually part of my PhD dissertation, in which we estimate the climate change effects on agricultural productivity in Brazil, specifying family farming productivity and large-scale agriculture productivity in Brazil. And then we calibrate a CG model to measure and to project the economic impacts of the phenomenon. So I'm going to present here the second part of the work related to the CG model and the regional and the economic impacts of the phenomenon. So climate change is a very challenging subject to understand, right? Because it can affect us in very different ways. But I think a good starting point to try to understand how the phenomenon can affect us is trying to capture the effects by agriculture. Because if you have climate change, you probably have agricultural productivity change. So it's a good starting point when you try to measure the effects on our economy, in our society. In agriculture in Brazil, it's a very important, or plays a very important economic role. We are one of the largest exporters of a lot of agricultural commodities such as soybean, cotton, corn, and related products such as orange juice or sugar, meat. So agriculture plays a very important economic role in Brazil. So if you have climate change, you have agricultural productivity change, and then we will probably face economic changes also. Brazil, such a large country, we have a very heterogeneous sector. If we could split the producers in two big groups, we would have, on one hand, family farmers, and on the other hand, large agricultural producers. And of course, they are also different in each group. But for instance, if you go in the north and northeast part of the country, we have less developed producers. especially family farmers. So they don't really use a lot of technology. They don't really control their environment. So their productivity are more sensitive to climate change. So we think that without climate change, they are already vulnerable. With climate change, their condition of vulnerability can also increase. So it's important to measure the impacts on those type of producers. On the other hand, we have large-scale producers. So they use a lot of technology, machinery, soil correction, irrigation, fertilizers, pesticides. So they can control more their environment. So their productivity are less sensitive to climate change. So they will probably be less affected by the phenomenon. But again, even though in each group of large producers or family farmers, they are different among them. For instance, family farmers in the south, they are developed. So they produce with a lot of technology, machinery, and their productivity are also less sensitive to climate change, as an example of the large producers. So it's important to capture all the characteristics of those producers to try to understand how climate change will impact their productivity and then how this will impact our economy. Here, I'm going to show you how climate change will impact our country. So this map is a historical precipitation. It's the left one is precipitation and the right one is temperature. So we can see that related to precipitation, the north part of the country is where we concentrate the highest levels of precipitation. The northeast, historically, we have low levels of precipitation. In terms of temperature, we have highest temperatures in the north, northeast, and midwest. If you go down south, we have cooler temperatures. Here we have average precipitation projected for 2050 for the RCP 4.5 scenario. So this is, we can consider as an optimistic scenario. In the left one, we have the pessimistic scenario, RCP 8.5. So we can see that in terms of precipitation, we are going to face a decrease in the levels of precipitation in the north, a decrease in the northeast, and this is the part where we don't really have a lot of precipitation. So we're gonna face a decrease in the already small levels of precipitations, and you're going to face a small increase in precipitation when you go down south. In terms of temperature, we see that highest levels of temperature on the north, northeast, and midwest, and this is the parts of the country that are already warm. So we're going to face an increase on temperature on those regions. So it's important to mention that the north and northeast part of the country are the less developed ones. So we are facing a phenomenon that is going to affect in negative terms the less developed part of the country. And as I'm going to show you, it will affect in a positive way parts of the country that are already developed. So this can brings more challenging aspects about the phenomenon regarding our economy. So the objective of the paper is to measure the direct and indirect impacts of the phenomenon through agricultural sectors and in terms of regions. So in general, we want to see the direction and the magnitude of the impacts in terms of sectors and regions, right? With a focus on family farmers because they are the vulnerable part of the agriculture in Brazil, especially in the northeast part. So how do we proceed? So in the other work, we calculate we estimate the climate change impacts on productivity. So we use a production function in which the productivity is determined by climatic, geographic, and productive factors. So we calculate for 21 crops from family farming and 21 crops from large-scale agriculture. And we use in our CG model as inputs or shocks in land productivity. So I'm talking here about the CG modeling. So we calibrate the CG modeling, we try to capture the specific modeling of family farming and large-scale agriculture in Brazil. And I think this is our main contribution here, because in Brazil, we don't really have any CG model that is focused on family farmers. So this is the first one. So we have 64 sectors, in which 42 is related to agricultural sectors, in which 21 is related to family farmers, and 21 is related to large-scale agriculture. And it is important to split the sectors because they have different production characteristics. And our model is based on the third model, it's a regular regional model. So our main contribution here is splitting sectors. So we have 21 for each producer. So we have, for instance, family farming coffee and large-scale coffee. We have family farming soybean and large-scale soybean. 21 crops for each producer. And the sectors are distinguished by the level of production, the number of workers, number of machinery or equipment that we use, the destination of the production, if it is for domestic or exportation, and also self-consumption. And this last one, self-consumption, is important for family farms. So it's the features of the model is just a regular feature of any CG model. The only difference is that we split all the sectors between family farmers and large-scale agriculture. Here's a picture of the production structure that we use. And I'm gonna try to explain how we introduce the shocks in the model. So we have land productivity shocks that we use in each crop in each region. So we have 42 sectors, and we have 27 federation units or regions. So this is what's going on the model. So we have, if we have increase in land productivity for some sector in some region, the sector will reallocate capital and labor. So if you have increase in land productivity, they will exchange capital and labor for more land. If you have a decrease in land productivity, they will exchange land for more capital and labor. And of course, respecting the substitution elasticity. It's important to mention that since we have 21 crops and some of the crops have more economic impact on the economy, the share of the economy are higher, such as soybean or sugarcane. If you have a shock on sugarcane or soybean, the net effect, the results will be higher than if you give a shock on peanuts production, for example. So this matters for the final results of the model. So the database that we use is from our previous work, in which we estimated climate change effects on productivity, and we adopted to use as a land productivity shock in the model. So we have 4 tables like this with shocks. This one is for family farming, for the optimistic scenario during 2021-2050. We have 21 sectors, and we have 27 regions in the model. The numbers in red is the negative impacts, and in blue is positive impact. And here, for example, if you see the federation units located in the northeast part of the country, negative impacts for corn, for cassava, for beans, other permanent crops, and banana, all with negative impacts. This is important for food security for family farmers. So we have here an example of how the shocks will impact this sector. So I'm just gonna show this data from family farming, because we have 4 big tables like this for each producer and for each scenario. Moving for the results and discussion, we can see that related to family farming sectors, important sector for food security will be negatively affected, such as cassava, bean, and banana. This I'm talking about Brazil. It's all aggregated in Brazil. On average, family farming sectors will face a decrease, small decrease, and the levels of impacts are higher on the pessimistic scenario, RCP 8.5. Okay, positive highlights for tobacco and corn. The results for large-scale agricultural sectors, we have positive highlights for sugarcane and soybeans related to Brazil. But if you look specifically soybeans in the regions, we have some important regions, such as a region that we call Mato Piba, will face a decrease in the production. But in general, we'll face a small increase in the production in the optimistic scenario. Negative impacts possible on trade balance, because we have negative impacts on cotton, corn, coffee, and beans, and those are products that we export. And again, if you move for RCP 8.5, the pessimistic scenario, the decrease is a little bit higher. The results for other sectors, I selected 6 important sectors that are related to agricultural sectors, especially fertilizers and pesticides. And we see that there's going to be a decrease on these sectors also. And of course, it's because they are really close to agricultural sectors. But the others, such as diesel, electricity, financial services, that also is important for agricultural sectors, but they sell for the whole economy. So the impacts on them are really small. The results in terms of regional impacts is interesting, because we can see that the north and northeast part of the country, both family farming and large-scale agriculture will be negatively impacted. And if you go in the south, you have positive impacts. And as I previously mentioned, north and northeast part of the country is where they are less developed, while the south part and the southeast part, we are more developed. So these results could increase the regional disparities among those producers and among the regions. The results in terms of GDP, considering all the sectors together, we see that most of the federation units are going to be negatively impacted, especially in the north and northeast part of the country. If you go to south again, we have positive impacts on Paraná, Rio Grande do Sul, and also in São Paulo state, in the southeast. This is important to mention, because this will contribute to the final results in terms of GDP, the Brazilian GDP. Because even though we have most of the federation units being negatively impacted, we have important federation units in terms of food production that are going to be positive impact, such as Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, and São Paulo.
Tariq, you have 5 more minutes.
All right. Thank you. So we have a small GDP retraction because of the positive performance of São Paulo, Paraná, and Rio Grande do Sul. right? So this contributes to minimize the negative impacts on our economy. But can, again, contribute to increase the regional disparities because those regions are already more developed. We have a decrease in household consumption, a decrease in levels of investment, in levels of exports because we have an increase in the prices. So the exports will be probably impacted also. We have a decrease in the levels of importations because of the decrease of the level of activity. And here, comparing family farming production and large-scale production, we have a higher decrease in large-scale production in Brazil, a small difference. Large-scale would be more affected climate change. Then relating to RCP 8.5, the pessimistic scenario, the levels of impact are a little bit higher. And almost finishing here, I got my final considerations. I made this table summarizing the results because we have 42 sectors, 21 from family farming, 21 from large scale, and 27 federation units. So this table here tries to summarize the results. For family farming, we have positive impacts for tobacco, peanut, grapes, and other of temporary crops, especially if you go in the south of the country. So in terms of federation units, those are will be on average positively impacted. In terms of negative impacts, we have important results in terms of food security because cassava, corn, banana, and beans will be mostly negatively impacted in the north, northeast, and midwest part of the country. In terms of large-scale agricultural results, we have positive highlights for sugarcane, grape, and tobacco leaf. And grape and tobacco, they are located more in the south part of the country. And sugarcane, it's in the Midwest, south and southeast part. And it's a crop that like warmer temperatures. So this is why sugarcane will be positively impacted. And since sugarcane is an important crop in terms of economic impacts, this will be will bring positive impact in terms of GDP. So south and southeast, part of the southeast will be positive impact, especially São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro states. In terms of negative impacts, we have impact on corn, cotton, beans, coffee, and I'll mention also soybeans on Mato Piba region. And in terms of region, the north, northeast, and midwest part of the country will be more negative impacted. In terms of monetary losses, we estimate that the losses could range annually from 3.5 billion to 8.1 billion, depending on the scenario. I think that's it. I have got on time, right? Thank you.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. Very nice presentation. Nice work. It seems there are questions for you. I'm going to start with the question asked by Bento, which also is my question. So how you calculated the climate impacts on crop yield? Would you explain that? What type of crop modeling you use or anything like that? And then the other question that I think is important is that how about productivity of livestock industry? And also we have a question that so which information did you use to split family size versus large scale? So these are the primary questions for you.
So the question about how did I measure the climate change impacts on productivity is the $1 million question. Because we have a lot of studies with different approaches. So what we did was we created a hybrid model that was part using Ricardian approach and part using production function approach. So we could capture, by the part of the Ricardian approach, we could capture the land use change also from climate change. And the part from the production function, we estimate, it was like a cross-sectional estimation of a production function where the productivity was determined by climate variables, geographic variables, and production variables. So we have this estimation, and we estimate with historical climate data. And again, I split it, family farm, responding, Joaquin, I split it family farming and large scale using data from the Brazilian agricultural census. So they have from the newest census made in 2017. So we have the characteristics in terms of production for each group. So we know the numbers of machinery, numbers of employees, if they correct the soil, if they use irrigation. This all enters the production function in the part of production factors. So in the production function, we also have climate variables. So we use historical data, and we use geographical data also as latitude, longitude, and altitude. And then we built this model, and then after we exchange the levels or the climate variables, instead of using historical data, we exchange for projected data made by INPE using the RCP scenarios, 4.5 and 8.5, and then we estimate the alterations in terms of productivity. So we could capture the impacts of climate change on productivity. So we pretty much control for the others factors, right? We could capture only the impacts of climate change using the projected climate variables such as temperature and precipitation using RCP 4.5, 8.5. And then we got for each region, we got one result, and for each crop, we have one result, and for each kind of producer, we have one result. So we use this as an input in our CG model, using or giving a shot in the land productivity factor. What else? If I use livestock, no. The shocks were only on agricultural sectors, only on crops. Livestock, no, we didn't estimate. Another question. Did I was clear?
So yeah, the other question was what information did you use to split family, small families, and then large?
Yeah, from the census. Yeah, from the Brazilian agricultural census that was released in 2017, and in the questions they have all these characteristics. They split family farmers and large scale. We have a definition of which is family farming and which is large scale in Brazil. They have some different specific characteristics, such as the number of labor from family farmers must be from the family, or the numbers of hired labor must be higher than, must be from family in a higher level than from hired labor. This is one of the characteristics, and also the size of the property. It's 4 fiscal modules to be considered family farmer. So pretty much the size and the kind of labor that they use makes this division large scale and family farmer.
Okay, so the next question, Angelo has made some suggestion and question. Would you please, Angelo, speak out yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so very nice work, Tarek. I have some question about the way you aggregate family farmers and large-scale farmers. So we know that the agriculture in Brazil is much more heterogeneous than that. So we have a kind of medium-sized farmers. There are just the guys squeezed in the middle of the family farmers with a lot of programs to help the family farmers, and the medium-sized farmers don't have that much. So probably you put together the medium-sized farmers with the large farmers, right? Okay, and do you assume the same climate shock in both types of farmers, or you have somehow some way to represent that climate shocks can be higher or lower to some group of those farmers?
So considering family farmers, it's also a heterogeneous group, right? But in our future works, we want to estimate the climate change impact on their productivity according to quantile regression. So we could capture the impacts in different groups inside of family farmers. But for this, now we couldn't do this. This was a start point. So in Brazil, we usually use agriculture as a whole. So we split it in two. But since the model capture the average impact, I think we can be more accurate about the results in the north and northeast part of the country, because most of the producers are kind of less developed. They are more homogeneous if you go in the northeast. But if you go in the south, you probably have more heterogeneity inside the family farmer group. But again, we got the results in the average, so it's average. Okay. Did I explain?
Okay, great. So as the last question, if there is no more from others, I have one question. So the question is how you model land use change. What approach have you used to model land use change in your CG?
Yeah, actually, it's a theoretical model. So this is not part of this work. Is the other work that I should present also. But it's a theoretical model in which we have a representative producer that allocate crops to produce, and he considers the rates of return of each crop, or how money he will make of each crop, and then he'll allocate considering climate change. So
is it a linear programming? Is it CP? Is it extreme functions? What type of theory is that?
It's how can I say? It's not dynamic. It's just a theory in which we try to explain that a producer, when he chooses a crop, he already knows which one is more profitable. And by doing that, we theoretically impose that he is aware of what's going on about climate. So it's only theory. It's not really a model with dynamic or endogenous allocation of land. It's just a theory.
I
It's
think,
just suppositions.
yeah. So I think it's important to explain that how you model this carefully, because that's very important for your model. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Nice work. With that, we go to the third presentation here. Bento present that, and that's again is about the impacts of climate change on the Brazilian economy and agriculture. Please move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Brazil. Good morning or good night. I don't know, everybody. It's nice to be here and finding friends again and having the opportunity to present what we've been doing recently. So it's nice to present after Tarek. He advanced a lot of interesting points in this issue. And what I'm going to show you, I'm going to present here is the same sort of analysis, the potential impacts on different Brazilian regions. It's joint work with my colleagues Carlos Nogueira dos Santos from Ponta Grossa and Ari Everton from Embrapa. So, oh, sorry, I have to, yeah. So this is, again, we all know that agriculture is one of the most important sectors. It's identified in international literature or one of the most vulnerable to climate change, right? And we know from the international literature a few stylized facts. So we all agree that the impact will be very different across the world. We all agree that most affected regions will be the tropical and subtropical regions. But surprisingly enough, the literature is relatively scarce on studies focusing on developing countries. The range of literature is much bigger for developed countries, and particularly when we have on effects inside countries. And you see, if you look to Brazil, that's actually a very important issue. We saw that in Tarek's paper. This is the map of the country. Brazil is 8.5 million square kilometers. And this, the colors here show the different weather regimes in the country. So we have here the Amazon. Inside the Amazon, different subclimate regimes. We have here the Brazilian Cerrados, which concentrates the bulk of grain production in the country. Part of the grain is also produced here in the borders of the northeast region. Here we have the dry and poor northeast of Brazil. Here we have the south and southeast part of Brazil, right? The richest part of the country, but also a very important agricultural producer in Brazil. For those not very used to Brazil, only São Paulo concentrates 35% of Brazilian GDP, São Paulo state. So it's much more diversified, and even though it is an important agricultural producer, agriculture has a much less importance in São Paulo than in the rest of the country. So we had previously many different evaluations of this climate change impacts on Brazil, right? Most of the evaluations were based on the previous, the fourth assessment report, okay? And now we have these results from the fifth, which is, I believe that's what Tarek told you, the new results from the Ir5 report. And this report incorporates many different advances in terms of modeling compared to the previous one, right? And for our purpose here in Brazil, for the representation of the downscaling of those scenarios to Brazil, one important advance was the incorporation of rainfall in the crop models used in Brazil. That didn't happen in the previous evaluations. I did, myself did, and so I'll try to put in perspective what this means for the result we had for the AR4, and now we have Ir5. So that's the objective we have for the paper. We will assess climate change impacts on agriculture using the new results from the IPCC report. The methodology is the same model Tarek presented here. Is the term model, which has been under development in our department in Brazil for since 2002. It's well known. It's Australian style model, bottom-up, interregional, dynamic recursive. We have 27 regions, 136 sectors. It was further aggregated, of course, for the results. 10 types of households, 10 types of workers. We don't have in this model the separation between different types of agriculture like that did. So we don't have family farmers, and it's all aggregated under one technology. The database is calibrated for 2010, and it's solving using GTAP. Now, the simulation strategy we use it here is different from the one Tarek used. Tarek used policy shocks, or sorry, productivity shocks, right? And we use a different strategy, which is based on the concept of loss of suitable area, or the change in suitable or apt area for agriculture. Right? I'll talk a bit more about how we did that, but this was done for 8 crops, which account for 83% of cropped area in Brazil. So we don't have information on livestock also, right? But 83% of total area of crops in 2012. Okay, the results were generated at municipality level. So for the 5,568 municipalities in the country, and we departed from two climate scenarios, two climate models, the hydrogen model and the MIROC model. Right? The MIROC model. So these 2 models are used by Embrapa Informática Agropecuária, which is, Embrapa is the Federal Agricultural Research Corporation in Brazil, right? Who's been working for long with this concept of agricultural climate risk zoning in Brazil since 1996. This is a kind of agricultural risk zoning, which is used both for rural credit and for insurance, rural insurance purpose, right? And it's a combination of concepts involving minimal production conditions and chances for successful harvesting. So an apt or a suitable area for agriculture is one which shows a probability greater than 80% of having minimal production in a certain period of time. Right? We use it 10 years. So Embrapa did all this work. It's our colleagues from Embrapa who did that. So the non-suitable areas are not eligible for credit, for rural credit or insurance crops. So this is the base of how we imagine the scenarios here. So we constructed the scenarios taking the effect over all municipalities in the last decade, 10 years, right? From the climate shocks brought by Ir5, right? So Embrapa uses several methodological steps to calculate that. All right, so the results are differentiated across Brazil. They depart from the 2 global models, climate models, which is hydrogen and MIROC, right? And then they do a dynamic downscaling. They use a dynamic downscaling method they use for the zone, the agricultural zoning risk. They use this model, this ATA model, which is based in the input, right? To calculate with a spatial resolution of 20 by 20%, the downscaling of the climate to the territory in Brazil with this 20 by 20 kilometers. This climate variation at municipality level with this kind of downscaled level was used in crop models for those 8 activities I showed before, right? In this crop model here, and then we got the variation in the suitable area by municipality, and then it was all aggregated again to the level of state level, which is the level of the model, the CG model we use. So the process entailed an average of the climate projections from the two models for the two scenarios, the 4.5, which is intermediate one, and the 8.5, which is pessimistic one, just like Eric did. So we got the average projection for weather, for climate, of these two models, and this was used to generate our scenarios at municipal level. So you can see that was a very long step, and actually this determines the results. Right? The result we have of the loss of the variation in the suitable area by region in the end gives us the final results, the CG model calculation. Well, I want to draw your attention to the results of the scenarios in terms of area variation here. As you can see here, let's start with the intermediate one. You see, for example, that soybeans is by far the activity, the agricultural activity which will be most severely affected. Right? This is in the very basis of all the results. Soybean, for example, in some regions like Bahia, which is an important, the west part of Bahia is an important soybean producer, in the intermediate scenario, would see a 17% loss in areas, agricultural areas suitable for soybeans in that region. Right? If you look to southern Brazil, this is even worse, because Paraná is one of the main producers. And in the intermediate scenario, we have a 90% fall in suitable area. Paraná will, under this scenario, and using the crop model we use now, which incorporate the rainfall. And I don't know if I said that before, but the difference between our scenarios now and the previous one, the Ir5 scenarios, is that the crop models now used by INPE, they incorporate rainfall. The previous one only had temperature changes. But it turns out that incorporating rainfall is a major difference in results. Right? It's a major difference. So we see that now for Paraná, for example, would have a total, basically a total loss of soybean areas, and the rest of South Brazil minus 64. As you can see, sugarcane benefits a lot in the intermediate scenario. Because sugarcane is grass, and grass likes increasing temperature and CO2 fertilization and rainfall, right? So we see here that in the same regions where we have a loss in soybean production, we have a strong increase in productivity for sugarcane. Paraná is a recent region which is becoming important in sugarcane production, and the more and more area would be gained there for sugarcane. But if we consider intermediate scenario, if you compare to the pessimistic one, we see another striking difference. The pessimistic scenario is called pessimistic because there is increase in temperature. The increase in temperature is higher in the pessimistic than in intermediate, and also the CO2 concentration is bigger. But the rainfall in these regions in Brazil increases in the pessimistic scenario. So we see here, for example, in Bahia, while we have, take soybeans example, we have a minus 17% change in suitable areas. In the intermediate scenario, actually, the suitable area increases, almost doubles in the pessimistic scenario. And the same happens here in Southeast Brazil. When we have a 90% fall in the intermediate scenario, the fall is much smaller in the pessimistic scenario. And when the rest of South, we have a minus 64% fall in suitability, suitable areas for soybean, actually have a strong increase in the pessimistic scenario. And this was very surprising, of course. I don't have to say that. It was very surprising for us. And then we went back to the crop models and we checked that. And well, that's what the crop model shows. Our crop model shows that the higher increase in precipitation and rainfall and CO2 fertilization in the pessimistic scenario actually is better for agriculture in some cases than in the intermediate one. Okay? Our simulation is just ran until 2040, and we saw that the results start to become worse in the pessimistic scenario after 2040, because then we don't have more CO2 fertilization, but we have to start to have CO2 poisoning for agriculture. But until 2040, right, that's what our the Embrapa's crop models show. So when we apply this change in area, in regions, so what we did, I go to the region where I have soybean, I have a 50% loss in area, I give a 50% shock in agricultural area used with soybean in that region. But of course, we know that this area won't be completely abandoned because it will be occupied by livestock, for example. Pasture is much more resilient. So our hypothesis is that pasture with the range of pasture like sugarcane is grass, right? And it is much more resilient to either to temperature and to CO2, right? Actually, it likes CO2. So we allowed the areas to be occupied by crops in the substitution process in the model, and that's what we get in the aggregate. GDP, you have, in the intermediate scenario, you have a minus 0.15% fall in GDP in Brazil. It's bigger than what Tarek got. But in the pessimistic scenario, it's even less. So the pessimistic scenario for agriculture is good in Brazil, according to the projections of these crop models. But as I have to stress, we have this, I think there's a lot, an enormous uncertainty on that. If we compare Ir5 with Ir4, we had the results for Ir4 before. You see, the results we got for the previous estimates of the fourth IPCC assessment were much bigger in terms of agricultural loss. And that's because the shocks, when we didn't compute rainfall in the crop model, the shocks were much, much bigger in all regions. Okay? So we see that the results are much less severe. The GDP falls less severe now with AR5 than we've got previously with AR4, using very much the same methodology. So when we look to particular crops, we see here the result of the crop models projections for our different crops. So we see here in intermediate a strong fall in supply of soybeans in Brazil. And that is considering that Brazil is the largest, one of the largest soybean producer and exporters in the country, that would be in the world, that would be disruptive maybe for the international trade. Okay, but in the pessimistic scenario again, we have a slight increase in soybean production. Consider that the area of soybean doesn't fall so much in the pessimistic scenario. We also don't have an enormous livestock. We don't have a livestock expansion in the pessimistic scenario as we have in the optimistic scenario. So, again, even though with all the uncertainty, we have to highlight the fact that the redistribution of agricultural activity in the territory has a potential to cushion this climate change impact, and apparently that will be much less, as we can see it now, than it was in the previous estimates. So this is the result on employment, which basically follows the results on GDP by region. So we have a strong fall in employment in soybeans, an increase in employment in sugarcane, in the intermediate scenario, but in both activities, the pessimistic one. And in terms of real GDP, again, we have a much different scenario, a much different result compared to our previous scenario, right? In our previous estimates, we had, for example, for Paraná state in southeast Brazil, a 3.8% fall in GDP. This is the scenario with adaptation. So we should compare now with a slight increase in GDP. We have a minus 0.73% fall in GDP for Paraná, and now we have a minus 1.24. Right? So the difference was in the previous one for the central Brazil, we had again a much worse prospect than we see now with this new estimate from Embrapa. So in terms of household consumption,
4 minutes.
All right, I'm finishing. In terms of household consumption, again, the effects are not as bad as it looked like, but we can see that for the regions which are most severely affected, we have 10 different households, but I just presented here the poorest and the richest for scenario for the intermediate, the poorest and the richest for the pessimistic scenario. And you see that the poorest, of course, are more affected. The weight, the share of food in their food bundle is higher, so they tend to be more severely affected. But again, this result is smaller, it's less severe with this new projection than it was in the past. So only to conclude and to find our main results is that the estimates that we have now seems to be much less severe with IR5 than it was previously, right? This is mainly due to the introduction of rainfall in our crop models, which we didn't have before. So a surprising thing here is that the pessimistic scenario seems to be less harmful for Brazilian agriculture than it is in the intermediate, for the reasons I have already pointed. All the results is basically connected to the soybean supply, right? To the behavior of soybean. There's been a long work, 40 years work of research in adaptation of soybean to Brazil. Soybeans started in the 60s, early 70s in South Brazil because it couldn't produce in higher latitudes, in lower latitudes than we have now. Now we have soybean close to the Amazon, right? But again, this climate change scenarios may threaten all this development. And finally, I think I can't stress enough the level of uncertainty we have. Right? This downscaling is subject to the accuracy of the crop models to forecast what happens at grid level in Brazil. And finally, we are not considering any mitigation policy here. So it's just and actually no productivity effect. It's just the land availability effect for each agriculture. So that's it for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very nice and fascinating presentation and work. I still do not see any question in the chat box, so I will start my question. So if there is no more other questions, it seems nothing coming into the chat box. So let me begin with this question. So of course, multi-cropping is an important factor in Brazil. It seems the approach that you are following is taking into account implication of climate change for multiple cropping. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, because we basically remove from production all the areas with a particular crop.
So now the question is, I see that you project major implication for soybean, yeah. But because soybean is usually produced in rotation with corn, but I do not see that implication for corn. How that will change the combination of these two and the rotation?
Well, corn, in some regions, corn is the second crop. It's like Mato Grosso. It's always the second crop, right?
Yeah.
And in some regions, it's the first crop, like this in Paraná, for example, in southern Brazil. So the crop models they use, they take into account the first and the second crop, because as you know, the crop model takes into account the rainfall precipitation according to the cycle of the culture. For example, it's useless if you have the rain in the wrong part of the season. So the crop models, they have the projections of rain in each month, in each particular stage of the culture. So for the second crops, they consider the rainfall in the dry season or in the winter in Center West. And so this means that the corn, for example, even if it is second crop, it will still be produced in the second crop because it will be feasible.
Okay. So yeah, that's great. And then so you mentioned that you did not have taken into account technological progress, for example. So what do you expect if you take into account new varieties of soybean and those kind of things, or other types of technological progress if that happened?
Yeah, we didn't take any adaptation measure into account in this at this point. But I think that it's an important question and very important I think the signals we've got with this kind of research is important for our research services. So there is an active research line on soybean now to have this more drought-resistant varieties. And this is exactly online with this kind of results. So actually, it's the only option we have, including using genetically modified crops to include genes of resistance to drought. That's one of the most important. Another adaptation possibility would be irrigation. It's not used for soybeans, for example, in Brazil, right? But we start to see it increasingly for seeds production, for example. It starts to be used even in Central West. But then we have a serious problem of endogeneity there, because if rainfall reduces, the supply of water will reduce also. So this adaptation possibility will be compromised, but we didn't look at that yet.
Okay, great. And I see that the question from Diego, the question is have you tried methods other than AR5 to see if they have indeed improved the results of the model?
No, we just use the AR5 method because we had this, Embrapa has this tradition in using these results and downscaling the results at municipal level. So yeah, we have to rely on their capacity for that. So we didn't use different ones. That would be nice if you could have it.
Okay, so is there any other question? I see that Jing is in here. Do you have any question, Jing?
I do, but Angelo, I think Angelo put a long question in the chat box. Has that been fully addressed?
So I didn't see that.
Yeah, maybe Angelo, you can unmute yourself and ask question.
Yes, can you hear me? I think my microphone is not working well.
Very well.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Bento, I think was a very nice presentation and very nice work you have done in terms of getting those impacts of climate change. We have seen now that most of our work in terms of climate impacts on crops is always considering just the crops where we have data available about climate change impacts. Mostly are the major crops or some crops that in our country people track. But it doesn't cover the full range of crops that we have. And usually it neglects impacts on pasture, it neglects possible impacts on livestock. And we know that cattle in Brazil, it's most of the cattle, it's outside, it's in the sun, and it's eating pastures, so it's very vulnerable. So the models that we use have a lot of adaptation room, just switching crops in the space or intensifying livestock production and so on. And we allow all those things to happen even if we are just shocking one share of the crops. Do you think that would make that much difference if we had good estimates about climate impacts on all crops and livestock systems and all the pasture land? Because we are always getting not very huge impacts in crop, in GDP, in agriculture production. And I guess it's because we have too much room of adaptation in our models if we neglect climate impacts in other crops, livestock systems, and pastures. What do you think about that?
I think you are correct, Angelo. In particular, we discussed that with Embrapa, but in particular, the crop models are not developed yet for permanent crops. For example, we don't have coffee, we don't have, even though the area is not very big, right? It's important for agriculture, but livestock to me is the most serious case. Not due to pasture. I think that pasture, as you know, pasture is very resilient, especially the variety we use in Brazil, the brachiaras, which are African, right? They are very resilient to increasing temperature. Actually, they like increasing temperature and rainfall up to a certain limit. But the animal behavior, that's really what we have to take into account. But so far, we're now talking to the guys there in Embrapa in a project on that. So we don't have this, as you said, our livestock is all at large. And so this temperature stress may be significant for productivity. Yes, I agree with you. That's important. And that may be one of the reasons why we're not getting more impact on GDP.
Great, thank you.
So, Jing, you have a question?
Yeah, very interesting presentation, Bento, and I too feel surprised to see actually at least in some area, the climate change is not that damaging. I have a question particularly about the potential of irrigation expansion. I know you have done something like that. The reason I'm asking was because I'm working with Cicero and Gerardo on a Simple G Brazil. So we have started. So we now have about 56,000 gray cells lined up in the Simple G Brazil model. So that have some significant cropland area represented in the country. And then when we start building them, we want to ask, so should we add the water in it? Is it really important to differentiate the rain-fed irrigated? It seems like the comments from Gerardo was, you mentioned it too, like the east or northeast part of the country is probably more vulnerable to the volatility of rainfall. And it looks like your future scenarios, some of them may benefiting from the future climate change. Does that mean the plan for expansion, for irrigation expansion is out of picture? It's not a problem at all?
Well, we are trying to develop a project where we are evaluating the impact of these scenarios on water supply. So most of irrigation water in Brazil is from rivers, right? And as I said, trying to adapt to using more water will conflict with the reduction in rainfall in some regions. I think that the northeast part of Brazil, where you mentioned, will be the most severely affected. We did the work you mentioned. We did years ago showed that there is no conflict, for example, for the plan of irrigation expansion in the San Francisco Basin, which is the river which runs north in Brazil, the only one towards northeast Brazil. But that didn't consider any climate change scenario. So I think that to think about adaptation using more irrigation, we will need more information on that, on the prospect of how that will affect the rainfall. That would be a dream for this year in particular, because we're in a cycle of drought in the country now, and on the verge of having energy ration. That can be part of a long-run cycle, but some people says it's linked to the Amazon deforestation, especially some guys in Egypt. If this is a permanent reduction in rainfall, right, that will seriously compromise this water supply scenario. So when I was an agronomist, I was studying agronomy in the 70s, I used to think that there was no water restriction in Brazil, and that was true in most of the territory. It's not true anymore. It's not true anymore. So I think that the possibilities of adaptation, we have to look more carefully under the climate change scenario.
Cool, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I enjoyed all of those. With that, let's conclude this session, and I appreciate all the efforts. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining this session.